Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
All of our guests today brought to you by our title sponsor, Able Auctions and ableauctions.ca. Just ahead of Matt Vensel from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Speaking of the Penguins, we understand that Mark Friedman and Brock McGinn have cleared waivers, and it's my understanding that will gain the Penguins $1.875 million worth of cap space.
Yeah. So there's the money that the Penguins need to make a big move, Donnie.
All right, Matt Vensel joining us now, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Wrote an article recently, early this week, about how the Penguins have engaged in trade talks with the Canucks centered on JT Miller. Matt joins us now. Thanks for doing this, sir. How are you?
I'm great. I'm in beautiful Tampa. I got some sun on me right now, so life is good.
Any update when it comes to the Pens' interest in JT Miller?
Yeah, I just got into town a little bit ago. There's nothing new on that front. I mean, the Penguins are going to be as patient as they can be under Ron Extall, which is quite a departure from Jim Rutherford when they were often the first to get in the fray. But, I think Hextall and the Penguins are going to wait as long as they can to see if prices go down on their trade targets. But with players going fast and furious, I know they can't wait too long.
Would a move for JT Miller and his large contract, I know he's from the Pittsburgh area, would it make sense for the Penguins?
I think it would. I mean, at least in the short term, and I think that's the way the organization wants to be thinking. They made clear what their intentions were last summer when they brought back Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, and also Brian Rust and Rickard Rakell. I know Hextall's talked a lot about wanting to replenish the prospect pool, but the window is right here and now over the next 1, 2, 3 years, if it's still open at all. So, I know some fans have grumbled about the idea of Miller and what his contract's going to look like a few years down the road. But in terms of the short term, if they can fit it in financially, and you guys know that the extension doesn't kick in until next summer, it does make sense in the short term because they've been so reliant on their top six. And I think if they were able to plug Miller in there, it would give them a lot more versatility and have a trickle-down effect on the lineup.
Matt, the biggest thing with Miller, everybody likes the player. It's the contract, 7 years. That's a long NHL capped out. Do you see any possible way they could get that contract into Pittsburgh? Like what would a trade look like with Vancouver for Miller? Even if they got close and they said, let's do it.
Yeah, it's challenging because they're not going to have a ton of space. I think they're projected to have about $20 million heading into next year, but they have a bunch of free agents, including Tristan Jarry. So if they were to bring in his $8 million cap hit, that would make it difficult. I mean, Jason Zucker is going to be a free agent after this year. You would think if they did acquire Miller that he would be one to go. Also Brian Dumoulin. But, in the short term, even though they are clearing space by putting some guys on waivers, I think if they were to acquire JT Miller, they would still need to move out a veteran. And then, long term, it would definitely affect their plans. I'm not sure, what the Vancouver Canucks would want to get out of this deal. I mean, obviously, there's the Jim Rutherford ties. There's guys like Brian Rust that he's had around. So I think that could be an interesting dynamic as well. But I'd be surprised if the Penguins wanted to move on from one of their top wingers to bring in Miller. I think they're probably looking to load up here and now and kind of worry about the consequences down the road.
Matt, what about the blue line in Pittsburgh? We know that the Canucks, first of all, not just Rutherford, Alvin. I know they like Marcus Pettersson, Pierre-Olivier Joseph's there. Another name I hear is Ty Smith. So there are defensemen there, Matt, that would interest the Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah, I mean, Pettersson was brought in by Jim Rutherford in Pittsburgh. Jim gave him his current contract, which is looking pretty good. It didn't look so much a year ago, but Marcus has had a tremendous year. Really was playing on the top pair for a little while and has been really good. So I think he's an appealing player. P.O. Joseph is young. He just finally became a regular. He was a first-round pick for Arizona. He struggled with his weight, struggled with consistency, but this year he's finally just started to settle in and not try to do too much, and he's been playing really well. Skates well, definitely a Jim Rutherford type of defenseman. And, I don't know if the Penguins are looking to move on from Ty Smith, but, he certainly fits the mold of, a Jim Rutherford type defenseman. I mean, you look at Kalen Addison, who he picked up here in Pittsburgh and then traded in the Zucker deal to Minnesota. I mean, same kind of size, same type of player. So, yeah, I mean, these two, a lot of teams like guys who can skate, but particularly the way these two teams are built. I mean, these are mobile blue liners. I can see why, Rutherford and Alvin and the Canucks would be interested in those three.
We just saw Patrick Kane move on after 16 years, successful years with the Chicago Blackhawks. Sidney Crosby, after this season, just a couple of years left on his contract. Evgeny Malkin, 3. Could you ever envision, Matt, those two or one of those two moving on to another franchise the way Patrick Kane has?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. I mean, everything, you ever hear from Sid, even when he goes into these big Canadian markets and everyone's asking him if he's going to leave. I mean, he wants to stay with the Penguins. I think it certainly helps that they made the commitment to Malkin and Letang in particular, 2 of his closest friends. So, yeah, he wants to be with the Penguins. He's thinking about adding more cups, not moving elsewhere, vice versa for the Penguins. But you never know. I mean, 5 years down the road, if, that kind of what has happened with Chicago, where both parties kind of see the writing on the wall. I don't know if that changes, but, everything you ever hear from Sid is that he's all in and wants to be all in for the rest of his career. He also wants to play at least another 5 years, I think. So who knows down the road, but I would put it at less than 10% that we ever see him in another uniform.
And Matt, earlier in the interview, you mentioned the name Ron Hextall. People have been chanting his name, not in a positive way, in Pittsburgh. Brian Burke is there. We understand that neither of those two received extensions from the Fenway group. What about their futures in Pittsburgh? How tenuous?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big deadline for them, and I think that's why you're seeing more urgency with the Penguins being linked to JT Miller, also Jacob Chikrin in Arizona.
Yeah.
I know Hextall wants to have, keep his first-round picks and build up that prospect pool, but I also think he probably feels urgency to make a big move now, not only with Sidney Crosby and Malkin playing so well at their age, but also, his job might be on the line. I mean, if the Penguins miss the playoffs or have their 5th straight first-round exit, I think the new ownership group, which, didn't get rid of those guys right away, gave them a chance. They gave them a chance to show what they could do. I could see ownership making a change if we have another ugly exit. So, yeah, there's a lot on line in Pittsburgh, high expectations as there is every year, but, you certainly feel the pressure from the fan base. And, I think Hextall has done a pretty good job of tuning it out and just quietly going about his business.
We're very familiar with Brian Burke here. Matt, enjoy Tampa Bay, and thanks for doing this great work this week, as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You bet.